you were in the Navy for quite a few years, and then I found. How did you become an astronaut? How tell us about the transition? How did that
Well,
happen?
I was 34 at the time. I was very happy in the Navy. I planned to make it my entire career, and I had been posted to headquarters in Ottawa to become a head of maritime combat systems for communications and electronic warfare. And I was sitting on my patio one day in I think it was May of 1983. And I read this ad in the paper, the Ottawa Citizen, that said Canadian astronaut program. Well, of course, you have to realize we didn't have an astronaut program back then, so this really caught my attention. It was a rather innocuous ad. It had been put out by the National Research Council, and it basically said Canada is looking for some astronauts. So that immediately got my attention, and I thought, wow, I've always had a sense of adventure. That's partly why I joined the Navy, and to have the opportunity perhaps to go out into space at a very early stage in the world's space program, if you like. It was too much to resist. So after talking to my wife about it, I decided to send in my application, not really thinking that I would get chosen. I was sure there'd be lots more qualified people than me, but in life you don't know if unless you try, and so I did, and at the end of a 6 month process with many different stages, I was chosen as one of the Canada's first six astronauts. So it was almost like a dream come true for me, and I'm so glad that I decided to write in and that I didn't miss the ad because I could have easily missed it.
Yeah, this guy, and in your book, you tell us that there were over 4,000 applicants in the first run, or something like that, right? And so it's.
Yeah, there was a lot of enthusiasm for it. It was new. Canada obviously has a lot of young Canadians and who are very enthusiastic about it, and perhaps a few older ones, because in fact, one of the applicants I discovered later on was a 78-year-old grandmother who really wanted to go into space, so she sent in her application. But the competition was pretty stiff, and I realized that later on when I met some of the people who had applied. And I thought to myself, wow, a pretty impressive group of people. Obviously, there's a strong desire amongst Canadians to take up that profession.
You say there was a grandmother that wanted to go. You mentioned in your book also that John Glenn, one of the early American astronauts, went back to space at an older age. Did he not? Or I wonder
Indeed,
if
he
you.
did.
Yeah. Would you
Yeah.
like to do that? Would you be up for it again?
Well, if they said to me, Mark, there's a spare place for you on the next capsule going up to the International Space Station, and you don't have to do any training, you can just go up there and be a passenger. Yeah, I would jump at the opportunity. But I also realize I've been spoiled. I've had three missions, and it would be it would be a bit selfish to ask for another one.
Yeah. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about, you were like you describe it in the book. It's really amazing. You how you go through all this training, and then the final stage, you're strapped in, the rockets are propelling, and the countdown and all the rest of it. What does that feel like? It seemed like a mixture of fear and excitement, and what's it like?
Yeah, no, I think you said it very well. During your training before the mission, you are focused entirely on making sure that you are ready for that mission. And you don't think too much about the actual launch, because what you're really focused on is making sure that you're going to know your stuff so well that you're not going to make mistakes, because you will have specific responsibilities when you get up there. And then on the morning of the launch, when you actually get strapped in, and of course, I went on, my missions were on the shuttle. So the shuttle is in a vertical position and you're sitting in the seat, and they wish you good luck about 2.5 hours before liftoff, and they close the side hatch door, which is how you got in. You suddenly realize, whoa, this is it. We are actually not doing a simulation anymore. This is the day that this vehicle is going to take me into space. And of course, the first time is rather special because you're going into the unknown, there's a lot of time for you to think during those 2.5 hours before liftoff, and you do a lot of thinking, and it's there's a mixture, as you say, a little bit of apprehension because you know they're going to unleash 7 million pounds of thrust below you to take you into space in about 8.5 minutes. That's how fast you get into space. Secondly, you're so excited because this is something that so few people have done. It turned out that I was about the 150th person to go into space, so it was still very early in the space era. And you think about all sorts of things, but one of the things I do remember the most was thinking about my family and how they were watching. And it's one of these transition moments in your life when you're going to literally um, be crossing the Rubicon. And what I mean by that is that, I'm an engineer, that there is the possibility that something goes wrong. So it's particularly important for you to feel that you have made peace with your family, your loved ones, your parents. And so I was thinking of them, and had I told them how much I loved them, and how did they feel about? They were totally supportive of this personal, private endeavor of mine. You think a lot about those things, and you think about very mundane things like, have I paid all my bills? That's the kind of experience that you go through in 2.5 hours because it's a very long time and there's very little for you to do in that period. And then finally, mercifully, you're kind of uh, relieved when the final countdown, the last 10 seconds occurs, and you can now focus entirely on what's going to happen and what you have to do to successfully get into space.
Can you give us a sense of what it's like to be in space, to be flying through space? What are some of the things that happen to your body and to your mind? And
It's an extraordinary experience, as I said in my book, because of two things primarily. Because the first one, and the one that stays with you your whole life, is seeing your planet below you. You're about 400 kilometers above the surface, so you see some definite curvature in the Earth as you're orbiting over the top of the world, and you're looking down and seeing countries below you, and knowing that you're going very, very fast. You're going at 28,000 kilometers an hour. So it only takes you 90 minutes to go around the entire planet. And I've been around it hundreds of times. And what it does is it changes your perspective. You no longer are thinking, if you like, about local issues. They somehow seem to fade into the background, and you become over time more concerned about the global issues. Are we taking care of our planet? You look at that fragile layer called the atmosphere, and you wonder, are we damaging it beyond repair? You know that if you read the papers that there are, dozens of conflicts going on down on the surface of that planet, and yet it's our only home for now 8 billion people. And you wonder, are we going to be able to find a way to get along with each other so that we can continue to live on this beautiful planet Earth, which is our only option? There is no plan B. So you begin to think on a more global scale, and somehow issues that were important to you in your daily life back on Earth don't seem to be quite as important. The other thing, of course, is floating, and floating is a lot of fun, and it sort of makes you rediscover the kid in you, because I'm supposed to be a serious adult, but having the opportunity to float around and do all sorts of things you can't do on Earth brings out the child in you. So those are the two things that are so unique about being in space.
uh, I like you mentioned puffy face and chicken legs. What's that about?
Yeah, there are physiological changes that occur. Now, I won't get into the details about, why astronauts often say there's no gravity up there. There is gravity up there. It's almost the same as on Earth, but you're free falling. You're free falling with inside your vehicle, and so it's as though there was no effect of gravity. And the result of that is that the fluids that are normally because of gravity on Earth lower down in your body, in your legs, in your stomach area, migrate upwards. And so it makes your legs look skinnier, and that's the chicken legs,
Yeah.
and it makes your face look puffier. If you look at astronauts that you know well, you'll see their faces fuller when they're up there. Even thin people look quite a bit fuller. So the very scientific name is puffy face chicken legs, and it's just because of this fluid shift. And it does have some effects on you because it makes you feel, for some people, makes them feel sort of stuffy, as though they had a cold.
I just wanted to ask you also, and you're up there with a tight group of astronauts. You're working very closely with them, living with them 24/7 for many days on end. It occurred to me just recently there were these astronauts that had been gone up for a week-long mission, and they wound up being stuck up there for 9 months. That must be very hard to deal with psychologically and mentally. Just to keep your mental health and your to stay sane. Can you tell us a little bit about how do you deal with unexpected things like that might happen in space and getting along with the other astronauts? Just that would be a challenge, it seems to me.
Yes, you're right to point that out. Normally, in a normal mission, such as the ones that I was on, and the ones where they go up to the International Space Station, but for longer periods of time, you train with your crew back on the ground, so you know them well. You know their idiosyncrasies. You adapt to them; they adapt to you. But you are also prepared for the unexpected. You know it's part of the training. And in the case of the two astronauts that went up on the Boeing capsule and then found out that they were going to have to wait 9 months before they could return, it is not something that would have come as a total surprise to them because they knew when they went up that the vehicle still had to be in good shape to bring them back down a week later. As it turned out, it wasn't. And they face the prospect now of spending a large amount of time in space. I would say that it would have been extremely difficult mentally for them if NASA had not adjusted things so that they could be fully occupied. And they were given lots of tasks to do. And when you feel that you are um, working productively and contributing to life on the International Space Station, as opposed to just floating around all the time and with no responsibility whatsoever, it makes it much easier and much more satisfying. And these were two very serious veterans. So they had the, if you like, the mental makeup and the experience and the maturity to put up with that very long, unexpected stay in space.
Mhm. After your first mission in 1984, you became quite a celebrity. And in March 1985, the President Ronald Reagan visited Canada, and Brian Mulroney, the Prime Minister then, they decided they wanted to use some of your star power. And so they invited you to perform a stunt at the Shamrock Summit. Tell us about that. At the Shamrock Summit in Quebec City, maybe people remember when when Irish Hides are smiling and all that routine that the two heads of state did. But you had a role there too. What was it?
Yeah, that was the night because Mulroney and Reagan became fast friends right from the moment that they met shortly after Brian Mulroney was elected prime minister. And Canada invited President Reagan and his wife Nancy up to the Shamrock Summit. And because I had met both of them in the Oval Office, in the White House 3 weeks before my flight, and I was there because they wanted to illustrate how Canada and the United States, perhaps quite a contrast with the situation that exists at the moment, but Reagan and Mulroney wanted to show that the two countries were fast friends. And here was an example of Canada and the United States cooperating, in this case, in the space arena. They decided that it would be great if I came to this gala evening. And so, but somebody in the Prime Minister's office dreamt up this scenario whereby I would, dressed as an astronaut, come up through a trap door on the stage of this auditorium where they were, and there would be sort of smoke everywhere and spotlights on me, and I would, after I had been lifted by a fork truck onto the stage through this trap door, would pronounce the words, "Take me to your leader." And so that's what I did. And I
Wow.
have to tell you, I felt slightly ridiculous doing it, but the audience seemed to love it for some reason. But that was my first exposure to if you like, the power of the Prime Minister's office. And so as a civil servant, I had no choice.
Yeah. Tell, that from that kind of lighter note, less than a year later, we all watched in horror when the Challenger blew up right shortly after takeoff. And what was the impact of that for you as an astronaut? You'd been on it. You knew exactly what that was all about. What was the impact on you and astronauts, the astronaut community, and on the space program generally?
Well, we were in shock. Although when you train and being an engineer, I knew this how complicated and complex a shuttle flight would be, and how technologically sophisticated the whole vehicle was. But how when you do release all that thrust to take you into space, there are things that can go wrong. It remained, it was abstract for me in a sense. I knew it was a possibility, and I'd even assigned a percentage probability to my own first flight, which was the 13th flight of the space shuttle. But when it actually happens, it is shocking. And I was watching it on television at the Johnson Space Center that morning. We were having a meeting to plan the next Canadian to fly. And when the vehicle blew up after 73 seconds, I think it was met in the room, which was full of people, with disbelief and shock, and then tears, and then crying, and also some disbelief, not really wanting to recognize that, yes. And I knew, because I'd flown on it, I knew how every second is supposed to unfold. And I knew that there was no chance that the crew could escape, not during that very, very dynamic first 2 minutes when the solid rocket boosters are lifting you into space. So it was an awful day. And then of course people started to ask me, would you fly again if you had a chance? Will the shuttle program continue? And I came to the realization that the desire to do something like going into space, for me and for just about every astronaut who had been hired at that point, Canadian and otherwise, is so strong that I'm not aware of anybody who actually said, okay, I'm quitting, I'm not going to be an astronaut anymore. The lure of going into space, it's not for everyone, is a very powerful one.
Mhm. Tell us a little more about your astronaut career. You went on 3 missions altogether, and what did you learn from them? In terms of the work that you did, and I'm interested too. Like in all of us, many of us, we've had careers. They're behind us, like you, and we generally go up. You promote there's a rungs that you climb through your career, and what are they for an astronaut? I mean, can you describe sort of how your role evolved? I imagine the third mission's not quite like the first mission, for example.
No, you do different things. On my first mission, I was a payload specialist, and so I was restricted to doing scientific experiments for Canadian scientists. But on my second and third missions, I was known and had trained as a mission specialist, which is a fully trained astronaut. And they do different things. Some of them do spacewalks. Some of them operate the Canadarm. They do scientific experiments. They do various other things. I was, for example, I was the medical doctor. I'm not a medical doctor, but I was trained how to do various different procedures because we didn't have a doctor on board. And so, things like drawing blood and doing a tracheotomy and things like that. Very, very interesting stuff. On my second mission, I operated the Canadarm and retrieved a satellite, a free-flying satellite. That was probably my most, if you like, demanding task, to catch a free flyer, because lots of things can go wrong, and then putting it back into the payload bay and bringing it back to Earth. And on my third flight, because I'd had experience as a Canadarm operator, they asked me again. This time we were building the International Space Station, and our mission was to bring up the first solar panels, those huge solar panels that are on the International Space Station. And again, I was given the responsibility to take the truss segment, because these are beams that make up the station. They're called trusses, which carried the solar panels. I had to lift these out of the payload bay. They occupied the entire payload bay, and position them so they could be attached to the station. We were building the station, and our job was to bring up those first solar panels. And also on that mission, I was responsible for resupplying the station and bringing back stuff, because you can't just resupply the station. You got to bring back completed experiments. You got to bring back waste and things like that. Otherwise, the station will get unbearably cluttered. So all sorts of very different. And I was also the flight engineer on my last flight. In other words, I backed up the pilot and the co-pilot to make sure that if something went wrong, that I was ready with the procedure for them to follow. So very demanding. There were only 5 of us on that third flight. So I had increasing responsibility as I flew more and more.
Mhm. Great. Well, that's and then in 2001, I mean, you lived in Houston for many years during this period, didn't you? But then in 2001, you came back to Canada. Is that or around there, to lead the Canadian Space Agency, and which had been established in 1990. You mentioned that when you became an astronaut, there was no space agency, right, when you first started. And this was the job that brought you back to Montreal, or brought you to Montreal. Like many people who have a military family background, you've lived in several places all over Canada and overseas, as you mentioned. But tell us a little bit about the job at the Canadian Space Agency, and about its achievements more broadly, and maybe you could add, if you could reflect a little on the Canadian Space Program, what it does for Canadians, and what is its current status and future.
Yes, well, you're right. After almost 9 years in Houston, I was contacted by the president of the Canadian Space Agency, who said he was going to retire, and that Prime Minister Chrétien wanted me to step into those shoes. First as executive vice president, so I could get up to speed, and then as president. And I ended up doing that for 4 years. So running the Canadian Space Agency basically is running the space program in Canada. Canada's space program is actually quite a remarkable space program. We've been pioneers in many, many areas. And the reason is very simple. It makes sense for Canada to exploit space, whether it's communication satellites that link us to the far north or to all the remote regions, whether it's Earth observation satellites that look down on our Canada being the second largest country on Earth, whether it's scientific satellites that look at the upper atmosphere, that are studying climate change, those kinds of things, and also the astronaut program itself as well. So the job of the president is to manage these projects. You have a budget, and you have to achieve those objectives. For example, building a satellite like RadarSat, which can see through cloud and through darkness to observe the Earth, is a very big undertaking. And in the process, you are supporting the Canadian space industry. We have a very important part of that here in Montreal, in Sainte-Anne-de-Bellevue. Some people may have seen it, MDA, from Highway 40, which builds spacecraft. It's currently preparing to build 198 satellites for Telesat Canada, which is Canada's telecommunications operator, a major satellite operator. So Yes, you've got three stakeholders, basically. You're supporting government on things like security and sovereignty and communications, all those needs through space. You're supporting the development of a space industry in the country so that we can compete on the world stage. And thirdly, you're supporting Canadian scientists in our universities who have scientific projects that they would like to realize and they need access to space so that they can put their instruments on a spacecraft. So a big responsibility, but one I thoroughly enjoyed, and I had some reluctance leaving it when I was lured into politics.
Yeah. Before getting to the politics stuff, and we'll get to that, but you write in your book, the most extraordinary right, that Canada is underplaying its hand in space, that we're not realizing our potential. And given your experience with the space agency, you're in a good position to make that kind of assessment. Could you elaborate a little on this? What more could we be doing, and what would be our niche?
Yeah, well, Canada is very good at space. We were the third country to build a spacecraft in the world. Alouette 1, which was launched in 1962 to study the ionosphere. We were the first country in the world to have our national telecommunications satellite operator, Telesat. We're world leaders in synthetic aperture radar spacecraft like RadarSat. We're the uncontested leaders in space robotics. We have some world-class astronomers and space scientists. And I feel that, where Canada is strong, and there are certain sectors where Canada has strength, those are the ones that we should be prioritizing and pushing the most, so that we can grow our space industry, so that we can address some of the challenges this country faces by using space. And I think climate change is definitely one of the major areas where we are observing significant changes in both our oceans and our land mass and our atmosphere. And so I think that we could do more in space, and certainly a message that I tried to continuously convey to my cabinet colleagues.
Mhm. Since your time as an astronaut, of course, there's been a lot of privatization of the space program, and in particular with Elon Musk's SpaceX and the thousands of Starlink satellites that are floating in space, and also there's new players entering this area, like China and India landed a vehicle on the south pole of the moon a few years ago. Um, what do you think about this? What do you think of this privatization trend in space?
Well, by and large, I'm in favor of it because I think industry can do some things that accelerate innovation. Governments are a little bit more careful and cautious, especially with the taxpayers' money. And 25 years ago, no private industry spent money on space because they didn't see a business case for it. They didn't see a good return for it. But now you have people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and others who have very deep pockets and see a business case for developing certain space-related technologies. And I think that they help to advance space technology because of their willingness to get involved. Space remains a very complex, technically demanding, risky, and expensive business. So if the private sector is going to get involved, that's a good thing. Now, here's my caveat. You mentioned Starlink. Elon Musk has now put 7,000, and the number is growing, spacecraft part of the Starlink constellation. This is to help us basically have sort of seamless internet anywhere on the planet. Um, that's all well and good, but we can't develop space like the Wild West. It has to be very, very carefully regulated. It has to make sure that we don't have unwanted collisions or frequency interferences, and also because we can't let one group sort of hog all the space volume, if you like. We have to allow other countries to get access to space as well. So I'm a bit concerned that it's evolving so quickly that it's perhaps not as regulated with the necessary um, standards and protocols and regulations. And it's not something that the United Nations, which should be doing this, is. I don't think it's fully up to speed on doing that task.
Mhm. Okay, we'll switch gears a little bit. In 2006, you made a big career change from space to politics. You ran as a liberal in Vaudreuil-Soulanges, west of Montreal, and you didn't win that election. But then you ran again in NDG Westmount. Uh, I'm in Westmount. I was a former constituent of yours, uh, where you were elected in 2008. And what were some of the biggest challenges of that change in career?
Well, I often say that when I was an astronaut, everybody liked me. It changed when I became a politician because, and quite rightfully so. When you embark in the political arena, you're fair game. People are entitled to tell you what they think of your policies. They're also perhaps less entitled to tell you what they think of you, but some of them do. And sometimes it gets quite personal, and sometimes it gets downright rude. So these are things you have to be prepared to accept and deal with, and not accept, but you have to deal with it, unfortunately, especially with social media. And so it helps to develop a little bit of a thicker skin, because if you're not prepared to accept criticism, some of which is very justified, some of it which is not justified, then you shouldn't be in the political profession. But I was lured into it. I was 56, so not exactly a young person entering politics, but with a lot of previous life experience and professional experience. And I thought I could contribute, especially to science and technology, which I think are things that require more attention. And so I decided to take that big risk and fell flat on my face on the first one in Vaudreuil-Soulanges because I wasn't a politician and I had to learn it the hard way. And also the Liberals were everybody was fed up with the Liberals. They'd been with Chrétien Martin, the government for 12 years. There was the sponsorship scandal. And so, as I've said to many people before, my timing was not optimal. But looking at it from a positive point of view, it allowed me in 2008 to get elected. And then I spent 7 years in opposition, learning the ropes before having the pleasure and the honor to be part of government.
Yeah, exactly. You soldiered away in the opposition benches for a good long time, and the Liberals were kind of in the political wilderness, as you said. I think they're the third party for some of that time. You weren't even the official opposition. And then 2015, elected majority government, and you're named the cabinet minister of transport. So tell us about that and about your tenure as transport minister.
Well, I was very surprised to be named transport minister because I was thinking to myself, first of all, it starts with this mysterious call you get from somebody in the prime minister's office telling you that you're to report to a secret location because maintaining the secrecy of who's going to be in cabinet until the swearing in is considered to be absolutely essential. So, I reported to this mysterious place at the particular point in time, and was told that I was being considered for a cabinet post. And then these two people basically asked me about my whole life. They want to make sure that there are no skeletons in your closet, because it's highly embarrassing for the government to elect somebody and then to find out that, or put somebody in cabinet and then find out that they have something that is not too attractive about their previous life, or controversial. So I passed that test, and then I got another phone call saying that the Prime Minister-elect, Justin Trudeau, wanted to meet me in the same location. And so I speculated in my mind, what would I be assigned? Now I had been in the Navy, I'd been at the Canadian Space Agency. I had been the foreign affairs critic for our party during our years as the third party. So I thought maybe one of those jobs, but the prime minister told me he wanted me as the transport minister, and I was genuinely surprised. But when I thought about it in the weeks after that, I realized actually it was a good choice because of my experience as a pilot, my experience in the Navy. I knew the maritime sort of world, maritime traffic. I knew air traffic control. So it re really wasn't a bad choice, and I ended up loving the job, and I did it for 5 years.
Yeah. Um, what was maybe the biggest challenge in that period? You had, I think there was the Ukrainian airliner that was shot down, or there were a few big issues that you had to deal with. Could you pick one and just tell us how you managed that as transport minister?
Yeah, there were a number of them, and very often they were related to safety because that's when Canadians stood up and said, our transportation system safe enough? The first one that I had to deal with, although it didn't happen during my tenure, it happened 2 years before, it was the Lac Mégantic tragedy where 47 people lost their lives. Well, I was made the transport minister almost a year and a half later, but had to deal with the aftermath of it. And so that was one. The second one was when the MAX 8, 730, Boeing 737 MAX 8 crashes occurred, one in Indonesia, and then 5 months later, another one in Ethiopia. And we had to deal with the fact that there was a design flaw in this aircraft, and how were we going to respond to it in terms of going forward to make sure, from a safety point of view, that we weren't putting people in an aircraft with a serious flaw. And then barely a few months later, not too far later, the fact that Iran shot down Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752 as it departed Tehran Airport, and for the longest time and still today have not fully accepted responsibility for it. They admit that they shot it down accidentally, but their accountability for it is still not there.
Mhm. And so after 5 years as transport minister, Prime Minister Trudeau appointed you to be foreign affairs minister in January of 2021. And it lasted just under a year, I think. And after an election held in September of 2021, he moved you out of cabinet, offering you some other posts. And you said in your book that it felt like a punch in the gut. Uh, I I wonder, which and I think most of us would agree that that's a pretty normal reaction. Um, but as you look back on your time in government and the Trudeau years in general, I wonder if you could just share some of your takeaway impressions, like what was achieved, what do you think are the high points, and what do you think are some things that were not so successful in that the government's time when you were part of it?
I would start off by making the very general remark that Canadians generally start to get tired of whoever is in government after about 8, 10 years. It happened with Mulroney, it happened with Harper, it happened with Chrétien Martin, and it happened with Justin Trudeau. There's a fatigue that sets in with the existing government. Uh, in part because of the fact that governments have missteps along the way, and that takes the shine off the government, which at the beginning may look fresh, but eventually doesn't look so fresh at the end. I think that Justin Trudeau's 9 years in government, he did accomplish some things that I regard as very positive. I think that his greatest accomplishment was getting reconciliation on a more serious footing. There's still a long way to go on that, but he is the first prime minister to have done so much in terms of starting the process of reconciliation with our Indigenous people. Secondly, he has reduced poverty amongst children, and that's with the Canada Child Benefit. There were some other things that he did which were quite different. One was, of course, legalizing marijuana. People have different views on it, but generally speaking, it's something that happened with less commotion than many people predicted. Severing, if you like, the umbilical cord from the Senate, which used to be part of the caucus of the Liberal Party. It still is for the Conservatives, but not for the Liberals. Those are some of the things that sort of stand out. But he also made mistakes with SNC-Lavalin and interfering with the Attorney General, Wilson Raybould. His ethics violations, starting with the Christmas holiday on the Aga Khan's Island, and a couple more after that. So I think that, depending on whether you're sort of slightly left of center or slightly right of center, you'll have a different judgment. I'm a bit of a blue liberal, and I think that more could have been done in terms of trying to on the economic side, but it was still a great honor to be part of this government, and I think that it did accomplish some good things, and getting back to my initial remark about how people get tired of governments after 8-10 years. I think we would all agree that 2 months ago, it didn't look like a Liberal government had any chance, and that the Conservatives were going to definitely take over. But as we all know, the decision by Justin Trudeau to finally retire under pressure, and the arrival of Donald Trump on the scene and his approach to well, not just Canada, but the rest of the world has changed all of that.
Yeah. I wonder, just we're getting near the end. I just a couple more questions. I can't help ask right now, with the situation with the election campaign and with the relations with the United States, as you just mentioned, looming over everything. As somebody who lived and worked in the United States for many years and worked very closely with American astronauts, and you really you lived in Houston, as we've mentioned, for 8 years. I wonder, what do you think about what's happened to Canada-U.S. relations in general? How are you experiencing that?
I think it's tragic. Here is the United States, because of Donald Trump, who was elected by a majority, not a large majority, but by a majority, doing awful things, not only with respect to tariffs on Canada, but on many, many other countries. His withdrawal from the leadership position that was built up by the United States in the post-war era. All of that, I think, is going to come back to haunt the United States. And I would say to you that Canada is doing the right thing at the moment. We have to suck it up. We have to be very cognizant of the fact that the world has changed, and it will probably never be the same again, not for a very long time. And that we perhaps should use this opportunity to make some very important changes that will reduce our dependence on the United States, both from an economic and a security point of view. It's going to be a different world going forward. We've got to strengthen our alliances with other countries. And I think that Donald Trump, the only thing that will make him change his mind is internal pressure within the United States, where people say to him, look, you promised us lower prices on day one. It hasn't happened, and it still hasn't happened. You promised us that you would create all of these jobs, and it's not happened yet. And you promised us a golden era. And where's that golden era? I think only internal pressure from within the United States will make him change his mind, because I don't think he cares what the rest of the world thinks.
Yeah, sadly. Okay, just a final question. You're 76 years old now, and here at MCLL, your audience is in the same cohort. So I wonder if I could just ask you, it'd be interesting to hear from you after your most extraordinary ride of a career and life. How do you adapt to retirement, and how do you go from being a very public man to a sort of more anonymous way of life at this later stage?
Well, it's worked well for me so far. And in fact, coincidentally, I was reading an article in New York Times this morning that talked about how it's important to prepare for retirement. So I did give it quite a bit of thought because, after the hectic life of being a politician, you sort of potentially are in a situation where you're no longer being asked to make decisions. You're no longer responsible for a whole bunch of important things. And how are you going to deal with that? For me, it's worked out very well. First of all, I had planned to write the book, and that took the first year and a half after my retirement. I retired in March of 2023. And I've been asked to participate in a number of things, which I've agreed to do, some of which I have not agreed to do, because I'm trying to take my retirement seriously and trying not to overcommit myself, because I don't want to accept something that will shortly after that start to feel like work. It's got to be something that I'm passionate about and that I'm happy to be involved with. I'm also doing more reading of non-government documents. I'm enjoying reading novels and nonfiction as well. I'm also much busier in the kitchen than I used to be, and my wife is has welcomed that, making different recipes, and because I find that's creative, and I still feel that urge to be creative, and enjoying that with sometimes with mixed success, but it's a work in progress.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Marc Garneau. I just like to mention once again to our members this, if you enjoyed this conversation, you'll enjoy this book as much as I did. It was really, it's a great read. And I think you should write another one, maybe, you did a great job on that. So thanks very much for sharing your experience with us. It's a great honor to have had you with us. And maybe someday if you'd like to come and join one and sit in for one of our lectures or study groups, I know that we'd welcome that. But nonetheless, have a great day. Thanks very much for joining us. And I'd like to just and a round of applause for Marc Garneau for having shared his experiences with us.
Yes.
It's really wonderful to have you.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. It was a real pleasure. I'm honored that to have been asked, and I wish you now that you're going to get down to the business part of your meeting, I wish you a good meeting. Take care.
Okay, very good. Thanks a lot, Marc.
Bye bye.
So, bye-bye now.